SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Barcelona, the industry-leading conference bringing you the future of sports betting and iGaming.
SBC Summit Barcelona is where you can experience the entire global industry coverage under one roof. Join 10,000 industry professionals for 3 days of game-changing conversation and education. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
On paper, Betr sounded like a true disruptor in the sports betting space. The huge clout and popularity of Jake Paul, the focus on the growing field of micro betting, a paradigm-shifting app, and a fresh approach to responsible gambling. People continue to believe Betr can be that game changer. The company recently completed a $35 million round of funding that pushed its valuation to more than $300 million. Yet, when you look at the results so far, they could be, better? All right, we're going to address all those things better and more on today's episode of iGaming Daily. I am Jessica Welman, editor of SBC Americas, joined by my senior journalist, Charlie Horner. Charlie, how are things going? Did you hold down the fort all right while I was in Denver?
Yeah, just about. I think, it's plenty of news as always.
Well, you handled things just fine from my end. From what I could tell, I was too busy meeting lawmakers, regulators, and a member or two of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission who apparently are familiar with my work, which was slightly terrifying. That is another pod for another day, though. All right, Betr. It came onto the scene last fall with the clout of Jake Paul. When you first heard about Betr as a project, what were your initial thoughts in terms of what kind of role it could play in the sports betting landscape?
Well, I think it's important to note what Betr was, or what Betr packaged itself as when it first came onto the scene and announced itself. So obviously Jake Paul, media personality, social media star, and Joey Levy from formerly of Simplebet, coming together to essentially create a micro betting product. Micro betting, of course, a bit of a buzzword at the moment. Short form betting seems to be the way people that user demand is going. So I thought potentially there was space for it to really be a disruptor, like you said in the introduction. But then as things developed, they've moved into more products. They've got the media wing. It just seems like Betr's doing a lot of different things, and it's a different product to what I initially thought it would be when they were first launching.
Yeah, this is where I will kind of echo that, in that when they said they were going to be a micro betting website, I assumed that was the offering, that you'd go in, and when you go into the Betr app, I will give them this, it looks different than a regular sports betting app. It's simplified down to this or that kind of displays of things, because you can do that with, will this next play be a touchdown? Yes or no. You can make the layout a little more interesting. I think it was probably, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Charlie, 6 to 8 weeks into launch in Ohio before they announced, like, oh, by the way, we're going to have full game lines, full money lines, full game totals on our platform as well. And while I guess they never didn't say that was where they were going, to me, that was the first time I raised an eyebrow and thought, okay, you presented, like you said, this very focused idea of what you were going to do, and now you're already kind of pivoting from that. I will say, though, listen, the tech side of this app, it wasn't something that like 4 days prior, they just were like, we should turn this on. You don't build that out in 6 weeks. That it does seem like it was always part of the plan. But it did feel like that announcement was the first time that people started to say, oh, okay, maybe this isn't exactly what I thought it was, right?
Yeah, I mean, the messaging and the marketing ahead of launch was very much focused on micro betting. This is how we're going to do things. We're not like a regular sports book. We're different. This is why you should use us. We're for the young people who are more interested in short form content. And it appears that was a little unclear or misleading because, like you say, you don't change course like that in 6 weeks. You have that planned for quite some time. And they probably should have let on to that at some point.
Things that I think they have gotten right about the younger Betr. They chose very early on that we are not going to do credit cards, even if we are in a state where credit cards are allowed, because we want people to be spending $1, $5, these small betting amounts, and assume that we will make it up in the volume of bets that they're doing because we're a micro betting site. I think that is part of that whole, I believe they said, we're going to TikTokify sports betting was the line when it came out. That part all makes sense to me. What doesn't seem to be happening is that this fleet of millions of Jake Paul followers are converting over to this app. Setting the stage a bit on that, though. Betr, Jake Paul is from Ohio, for those who don't know. So Ohio was the first big one for them, that they wanted to be there for day one when it debuted. They weren't really fully there for day one, though. Charlie, I believe you were the one who covered that they had some tech foibles and woes at the beginning of this process, right? So January 1st was launch for many, but not really for them.
No, not really. They didn't begin accepting real money wages until sort of mid-January. I don't think a reason ever came out, but we're led to believe that it would have been a potential issue, maybe with a payment processing firm that they were using, a little technical glitch, something like that, which, obviously meant that they couldn't begin taking bets at the start of Ohio when, of course, everyone else was. And that can set you back, because for 2 weeks when there are sports fixtures going on, the people who actually want to place bets, they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to DraftKings, they're going to FanDuel, they're going to all the big boys.
You're also talking about the NFL postseason. So every week, that playoff slate is being divided in half. And the opportunities to bet on, 8 games versus 4 games versus 2 games immediately will have that kind of impact on your bottom line. Then, so they didn't have a full month of January. So handle came in Ohio, it was less than 1%, I think, of total handle. It was smaller than some of the local operators. I guess, we talked about what our initial thoughts of what Betr could be were. When you first saw that in Ohio, it was performing near the bottom of the pack, how surprising was that to you?
It is quite surprising because, the star power of Jake Paul is strong. If you look at his businesses elsewhere and his social media following and that kind of thing, you would be led to believe that it would perform extraordinarily well. It's not turned out to be like that. And I was a little bit surprised, but of course, I think the technical glitches early on has probably got to play a part in that. But I also think it's what does Betr want to be, like we touched on earlier.
Yeah, I don't know what my expectations were. I certainly don't think they were going to come in and beat FanDuel and DraftKings month one. But if you were going to get that kind of star power together, I would have thought 5% of the market was somewhere that you were probably aiming for. Joey Levy has since clarified and been stuck to this message from the jump, and I do believe him, that they are not playing the market share game, which is good because they would be dead last. They are playing the low customer acquisition cost game and saying, well, we've got Jake, and then we hired these Kavinder twins out of college who have their own following, and we will use those followings to keep the cost of acquiring a player very low so that our margins can be a little thinner and that we can be more profitable, because we're not doing what many operators did when the U.S. opened up, which is spending $300, $400 a person to acquire them. Now, since Ohio, Betr launched in May in Massachusetts, so we only have 2 months or 2 states rather of data so far and a very limited sample size. So this is where I say, go to your kitchen cabinet, grab your Mortons, and pour those grains of salt in your hand as we go through the financials of this. But Charlie, I know we've written kind of month by month how Betr has performed. I'm going to give you in aggregate these numbers, and I really wish we had video because I think your reaction to them is going to be a little bit surprised. Let's start with Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, they've been operational, and we have data for about the first 6 weeks that they've performed. Based on 2 weeks in Massachusetts, they had done, 593,000 in handle that first 2 weeks. The revenue report from June just came out. That number plummeted down to, I think it was, 200 something. So big fall. So in 6 weeks, the operator has done 884,000 in handle. And they've generated $58,662 in revenue, 20% of which goes to the state in taxes. And because of the nature of what we get in the Massachusetts revenue report, we have no idea how much was of that remaining, 45,000 or so went to promotional credits and that sort of thing. You would assume the cost of doing business in Massachusetts exceeds $45,000 a month, but you never know. All right, so that's Massachusetts so far. Ohio, we have a little more to work with. They have done 4.2 million in handles so far this is through May, I believe we have figures on. They have generated, their hold's a little better there, 313.8 thousand in revenue. Any guesses, Charlie, how much they've spent on promotional credit in the state so far? Because in Ohio, we do have that number.
Yeah, well, we know that a lot of operators went big on promo credit spending early on, sort of waned a little bit. I would hazard a guess from the way this conversation's going that it's probably going to exceed revenue.
It did exceed by quite a bit. They have spent $709,690 of promotional credit. So they have spent more than double what they have earned and are operating at a loss there. On the bright side, or actually not on the bright side, in Ohio, you can have promo credits, but those deductions do not apply to your taxes. So they are still paying taxes on that revenue that was all, spent on marketing acquisition. So this kind of begs the question, again, small sample size. If your whole spiel is, we're going to have low customer acquisition costs, it's not great that more than twice of what you make is being spent on what could arguably be termed customer acquisition costs, and you are operating at a loss in this state.
Yeah, and I mean, those figures are quite startling for one thing, but then Betr has an entire media unit as well.
Maybe that's where they're making money.
Potentially, but it just makes me wonder that, surely if you've got a whole media brand that is owned by one of the biggest social media stars on the planet, surely you could do a little bit of a better job in converting some of those media consumers into sports bettors.
I wish I had like a bell or something that I could ding every time we make some sort of better pun on the pod today, because you just floated like 2 in the span of 20 seconds. Okay. Yeah. And again, context, let's get our salt. In Ohio, numerous operators, especially in those first 2 months when NFL season was still running, were spending far more on promotional credit than they were bringing in. That is par for the course when you launch in a new state. However, when you look now at May, and that now we are kind of in the doldrums of the sports betting calendar, you will see that there are still a handful of operators that are slightly outspending what they're making, but the decline is steep. The promotional credit drop off in this period of time has been relatively substantial for most operators, whereas Betr is consistently spending essentially the same amount of money. Here's each monthly figure: 152,000, 95,000, 159,000, 172,000, 134,000. Meanwhile, you take a look at Hard Rock, you take a look at Caesars, you take a look at some of these local operators who have the benefit of a very robust database of casino customers, and they're spending a fraction of what they make on customer acquisition costs. But I'll let you weigh in on this in a second. My last point on this is you can't whine that these groups have this database and that's why customer acquisition is cheaper if your entire value proposition is that you have Jake Paul and this pile of people that are cheap to acquire. You didn't just like crawl out of a hole and start from zero.
Yeah, my point was going to be quite similar, is that the two things aren't really conducive with each other. That on one hand, okay, they are a new brand. They don't have a database of casino players to leverage for sports. So you could argue that they need to spend to try and gather some of those users. But you can't also then say, oh, by the way, a main advantage that we have is that we're a low customer acquisition price business. And yeah, those two things don't really add up together. So they need to pick one strategy and stick with it.
Yeah, pick your lane, Jake Paul. But what I would love to see their pitch deck, because they did recently, as I said in the intro, they completed a $35 million funding round. This company is valued at $300 million, even though so far they are operating completely at a loss as a sports betting operator. Again, par for the course. DraftKings is still, operating at losses. It's normal to operate at a loss, but what is less normal is to have such small numbers and be operating at a loss. So yeah, this valuation, they are persuading people that this concept still works and that micro betting is still a thing. What's curious to me is that if there is a sport in the US ecosystem that is perfect for micro betting, it's baseball. There's plenty of time in between things to bet on what's going to happen, that you would think that once NBA drops off the calendar, once hockey drops off the calendar, that the interest in live betting baseball would help pad those losses a bit. And it seems like for Betr, the fall has been steeper than most. Again, huge grain of salt. We're talking about very limited amounts of data, but just something to kind of throw out there. Is micro betting as popular as we really think it is? Or is micro betting on Betr as popular as we think it is?
It is something that we've spoken a lot about probably in the last year or so. And it is something that we keep being told, this thing is going to be huge. It's the future of betting and this kind of thing. That very well might be the case. And we've spoken to a lot of very smart people in the micro betting world. We're yet to see it really come into fruition, especially with Betr. But of course, like we've said, we're not really sure if micro betting is their sort of USP anymore, because they seem to be pointing to lots of different things that they're doing that makes them special.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one too. It's worth noting, baseball as a fandom tends to skew a little older. That who knows if the Jake Paul fans are really the baseball bettors out there. Most operators say, anecdotally, that micro betting or in-game betting is about 30% of their transactions. Simple Bet is very good at micro betting technology, and they're bringing it along to deal with some of the issues regarding latency and that sort of thing. But it just, so far, it seems like that's not the most sustainable thing, that you wonder, they have full game markets, if props and futures and those sorts of things might be on the horizon for them. All right. Last kind of point about this, and I think we've discussed this on a previous pod to some extent. Jake Paul's young audience, how many of them are simply too young to be legally betting in the United States right now?
Well, if you ask Ladbrokes in the UK, not many. No, I think it's definitely something to consider, especially when you take into account that, it's 21 and over in the US compared to 18 in the UK. yeah, Jake Paul has a lot of very young followers. That's just part and parcel of being a star on YouTube and TikTok. You're going to attract younger people. With the really strong KYC processes and regulations that we have, those people can't bet. And the people who are 21 and over, they might have already opened an account with FanDuel or DraftKings or any of the other operators. So, yeah, it's definitely something that we should take into account.
Yeah, I mean, Massachusetts did some hearings about this. There were questions to Jake Paul himself, who appeared at their licensure hearing, about how young his audience is. If you're looking at it from the perspective of, is the majority of his audience a bunch of teenagers? No. But, 10 to 12% are under the age of 18. I think once you extend that out to, say, 25, that number probably doubles. And that's a chunk of who you're talking about. You also have to keep in mind that right now, the only followers of Jake Paul who can participate in Betr are those who are in Ohio and Massachusetts, which I would argue is a smaller percentage than the percentage of teenagers that follow him. That perhaps as this scales, things become more tilted in favor of what Jake Paul's audience is and the opportunity. But right now, I think because you have so many limitations on where you can go, it does kind of matter that so many of them are too young to bet, because you're taking what's already a subsection of the audience and you're subdividing another 20% off of it.
Yeah, I think this is why we should take a little bit of salt about what we're saying today, because this really could scale up as Betr launches elsewhere. 2 states so far, and just a few weeks in Massachusetts, and it's not looking incredibly strong. But this could all change in the years to come, and as maybe some of those players some of those followers who are under 21, come over the age and become legal bettors.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see, too, with a new round of funding to pay for these promotional credits that you don't have any other way to pay for. If they continue to roll out in new states, I believe we've seen that they have obtained their license in both Maryland and Virginia. I believe, should fact check myself before I get on the podcast a little more often, right? Football season is coming up. We'll see if they roll out in a couple more. But again, if you're not making any money and you don't have the endless piles of investment funds, I think you do have to be mindful of which states you choose to roll out in and which ones you don't, especially during a football season where the cost of acquisition is going to be higher for everyone across the board. You could be Jake Paul, you could be God, you could be LeBron James. Your acquisition costs are going up during football season. All right, keep an eye out on that. You can read the full breakdown of the Massachusetts revenue report from June on SBC Americas. You can also see, I mentioned in my recap of Nickel Geese yesterday, talks about how these smaller operators are being more adversely impacted in states like Ohio, where, now Betr has to pay twice the amount of taxes on the imaginary revenue that it has because it's erasing it all in promo credit. Charlie, what else should people be on the lookout for at SBC Americas this week?
Well, it was really fun when I woke up this morning to a message saying there's 90 million bits of news. So there's plenty going on, including Entain concluding their acquisition of Angstrom Sports. And of course, Penn has completed the migration of the Barstool tech stack onto the proprietary platform from its previous Canby solution. So those two bits of news stand out for me.
All right, we've got all those tech acquisitions and more on SBC Americas. So head over there, check those out, and we will catch you next week on iGaming Daily.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Barcelona, being held at the Fira Barcelona Montjuic on the 19th to the 21st of September. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.